The frozen moon hung over the training valley like a cracked pearl, its pale glow smudged by the cold sunlight that spilled across the ice fields. The air here was thin and dry, too clean, without the comforting smell of soil or vegetation, and every breath left a faint plume that drifted away and vanished as if even warmth was unwelcome. A ring of alien cadets stood in a shallow depression where the wind howled less fiercely, clustered around a semicircle of dull gray stones that marked the official fire pit. Each cadet wore the dark uniform of the Interstellar Survival Academy, thermal plates humming softly under layered fabric, insignias flashing status colors over hearts and shoulders. Behind them, beyond the low ridge that shielded the pit, the horizon was a jagged line of ice cliffs and splintered boulders, carved by some ancient glacier that never fully melted. Liam tugged his gloves tighter and flexed his fingers, the leather creaking faintly in the cold. He stood a little apart from the group, close enough to hear but far enough that no one bumped into him as they paced in anxious little arcs. He could feel the tension bouncing between the cadets like static. This was the midterm field test, the trial of embers, and according to the Academy's regulations, one failure in survival fundamentals could block advancement for an entire cycle. The assignment sounded simple when the instructor had announced it back on the shuttle. Start a self-sustaining fire using only what could be found on the ground within the designated zone. No standard-issue heat rods, no emergency flares, no borrowed plasma from personal sidearms, just the land, the sun, and the minds of the cadets. On any forested world Liam knew, he would have relaxed at the thought. Here, he did not relax. Captain Arhes, the instructor overseeing the test, watched from a nearby outcrop, arms folded over her chest. Her species was tall and angular, blue-tinged skin lined with faint bioluminescent seams that pulsed slowly with each heartbeat. When she spoke, her voice hummed through the air and through the cadets' chest plates, matched perfectly to the Academy's translator implants. "Your time limit begins now," she had said when the shuttle's engines had faded into the high atmosphere. "You have 3 standard hours to produce a stable flame large enough to boil 1 liter of water. The environment will not be altered for your convenience. Adapt or fail." The words still hung in everyone's memory like frost. The cadets had immediately scattered, boots crunching over the hard-packed snow and clear ice. Sarah, a compact alien girl with gray-violet skin and lacquered black sensory spines along her scalp, dropped to a crouch near the stone ring and began unpacking her minimal gear. Her species favored precision and ritual in technology, and she had already etched a meticulous checklist into her wrist slate. Kor, tall and broad-shouldered with mottled copper plating along his arms, stomped away toward a broken ridge where shards of mineral crystal jutted from the ice like teeth. 2 more cadets, twins from a low-gravity ocean world, glided downslope with their strange, fluid gait, scanning the ice for trapped organic matter. Liam watched them all fan out, then knelt to brush snow away from the stones. Beneath the thin layer of powder lay bare rock, smooth and cold, offering nothing that suggested fuel. He straightened and turned slowly, taking in the valley with the eyes of someone who had once built campfires just for the pleasure of watching sparks rise into starry skies. Here, the sky was bright but colorless, bleached by the glare of the distant sun, reflecting off a landscape that looked more like glass than frozen water. The diagnostic output on his visor confirmed what his skin already knew. Temperature far below freezing, humidity near 0, wind variable but steady. It was the worst possible combination for catching and holding a flame. Sarah was the first to attempt ignition. She had retrieved a set of crystal rods from the standard survival kit, long translucent sticks that hummed faintly. On a temperate world, the friction between those rods could excite microscopic conductive elements and produce a focused hot point. She planted her boots, pressed one rod into a shallow groove on the other, and started rubbing with measured, precise movements. Her jaw tightened as she counted pass intervals under her breath coming out in controlled puffs. Nothing happened. No spark leaped, no wisp of smoke curled upward. The rods squealed against each other in an unpleasant glassy scrape. Sarah paused, adjusted the angle by a fraction of a degree, and tried again, this time pushing harder. After a minute of this, frost began to form along the edges of the groove, as if the energy she poured into the rods was flowing straight into the surrounding air and bleeding away. She hissed in frustration and flicked the rods aside, where they landed in the snow with a soft thud. Kor returned with his arms full of jagged mineral shards, which glowed faintly along their internal veins. He dumped them in a rough pile beside the stone ring and grinned, the edges of his teeth gleaming. "If I strike these together, we should get charge," he said. "Capacitive discharge, high voltage. Enough for a start." Captain Arhes said nothing, only watched. Kor chose two of the largest crystals and slammed them together with a sharp crack. A spray of pale sparks snapped between the points, illuminating his face, but the sparks fizzled out before they even reached the stones. He tried again, adjusting his grip, rotating the crystals to meet at different angles. Crack, snap, flare, fade. The light came and went too quickly, stripped of power by the cold before it could bite into anything. He growled deep in his throat and worked harder, sweat freezing at the corners of his mouth despite the thermal plates under his uniform. One of the twins, Lena, returned with a handful of brittle, fibrous material she had scraped from under an ice shelf. It looked like dead lichen or some fungus that had tried to live under the relentless glare of reflected sunlight and failed. She knelt, laid the fibers in a careful nest on the rock, and gestured for Kor to strike the crystals above it. He did, leaning closer so the sparks would fall almost directly onto the makeshift tinder. Again, bright flecks scattered. A few landed on the fibers, flashed brighter for an instant, and vanished, leaving behind only a faint darkening that might have been moisture from Liam's breath rather than heat damage. A minute later, the fibers snapped apart in Lena's gloved hand, so dry that they crumbled rather than bent. Sarah stalked away a few paces and stared out over the valley, her arms folded tight across her chest. Liam could almost hear the calculations grinding through her head as she tried to reconcile the failure with the theory she had studied. On her homeworld, the crystal rods would have ignited a peat brick in under 30 seconds. Here, they might as well have been 2 sticks of frozen glass. Liam knelt near the abandoned fibers and pinched a bit between his fingers. The texture was right for tinder, on the edge of disintegration, but still capable of catching if given the right kind of push. Not this way, he thought, rubbing the fibers gently. Not with methods that rely on conductive air. The cadets cycled through more techniques as the minutes ticked past. One used a biochemical igniter, a small pod that released a droplet of reactive gel when squeezed. On test worlds closer to standard atmosphere, the gel would combust upon exposure, a handy one-use spark. Here, when the droplet oozed out onto the stone, it shivered, steamed briefly, and then froze into a dull, inert bead. Another cadet tried to harness electrostatic charge by shuffling across the ice in a pattern designed to maximize friction, then discharging the accumulated energy into the fiber nest. The buildup registered on Liam's visor as an impressive voltage spike, but when the cadet crouched and triggered the discharge, the flash of light was brief, and the fibers remained stubbornly dormant. The wind picked up, sliding cold fingers under collars and into the gaps between gloves and sleeves. It whistled over the stone ring and shot fine needles of snow into faces and eyes. Liam squinted, turning his head away from the gusts, and glanced at Captain Arhes. She had not moved, except to consult the timer on her wrist. She was not here to help them, only to observe whether they could adapt. That was the point of the trial of embers, not to demonstrate a memorized procedure, but to prove that a cadet could think beyond habit. The aliens were starting to talk over one another now, voices overlapping with rising desperation. Sarah insisted that the problem lay in the density of the air and suggested constructing a windbreak from their limited supplies. Kor argued that the heat output simply was not high enough and proposed cannibalizing a component from his suit's thermal system, an idea the others immediately rejected as too risky. Another cadet brought up the possibility that the Academy had tampered with their tools to force a particular solution. That suggestion earned a sharp snort from Sarah, who insisted that sabotage would undermine the validity of the test. Liam listened, words passing over him like the wind, while his gaze drifted upward to the sun. It hung low but bright, a small, hard disk in a washed-out sky. Sunlight bounced off every surface around them, harsh enough that his visor dimmed automatically to protect his eyes. Light, he thought. There is light everywhere, stronger than on some forest afternoons back home. Heat is there too, just scattered. On Earth, he had learned that fire was less about objects and more about relationships. Enough heat, enough fuel, enough oxygen, all held together long enough to let a reaction run away with itself. Here, the heat refused to stay put. It flew apart as fast as the cadets could call it down. He looked at the clear ice under his boots. In places, it was so transparent that he could see trapped bubbles inside, tiny ghosts caught mid-rise. He had seen ice like this before, as a boy on frozen lakes, when he had pressed his palm against the surface and marveled that he could see stones on the lake bed as if through distorted glass. He crouched and ran a glove over the smooth surface, wiping away frost until a clearer patch emerged, a little window into the blue depths. Light glared back at him. Behind him, one of the twins muttered that they were wasting time, that only 2 hours remained. Someone asked where the human was, and another voice replied that he was poking at the ground as usual. Liam pretended not to hear. He knew how he appeared to them. The lone human, from a species that loved fire so much it wove it into myths and holidays, now reduced to just another cadet under the Academy's impartial eye. He had come here because he wanted to prove that those old campfire lessons mattered in a galaxy of plasma weapons and fusion cores. So far, all he had done was watch. The timer on his wrist pinged softly, marking the first hour past. The sound cut through the babble, and the group fell silent for a heartbeat before the anxious talk resumed, quicker and less organized. Liam rose, brushing snow from his knees, and looked from the sun to the ice, from the ice to the meager scraps of potential tinder the others had gathered. His breath fogged in front of him, slow and steady. Somewhere in his memory, his father's voice recited an old camping rule about using what the land wanted to give as a partner, not as an enemy. In front of the stone ring, the cold wind blew again, flattening everyone's breath and erasing footprints almost as soon as they were made. No flame burned there yet. No comforting crackle broke the silence. The trial of embers had truly begun, and for the alien cadets, frustration was building toward panic, while the human at the edge of the group finally began to see the shape of a different answer. The wind settled into a low, constant moan as the second hour began, no longer gusting but humming through the hollow spaces between the ice ridges like a tuned instrument. The alien cadets gathered again near the fire pit, forming a loose circle that radiated agitation. Each stood tense and rigid, uniforms dimming as the thermal plates struggled to stay ahead of the cold. Captain Arhes remained on her outcrop, unmoving and unreadable, but the silence with which she observed the group only tightened the pressure around every cadet's shoulders. No one wanted to speak first, but the failure of every earlier attempt clung to the air like an invisible frost. Kor finally broke the silence with a sharp exhale that puffed white vapor around his head. He slammed one of his crystals into the snow at his feet and growled under his breath. His heavy frame shook with frustration. He refused to look at anyone, as if eye contact might trigger a confession of defeat he refused to give. Sarah lifted her chin and pressed a palm to her visor, scrolling through her notes with clipped finger motions. She muttered numbers, material densities, and friction coefficients, but her voice trembled with an edge of disbelief. Her confidence, normally as hard and polished as the crystal rods she favored, was cracking. Lena crouched near the stone ring again, though she no longer searched for materials. She simply stared into the empty pit, as if hoping a spark might appear out of pity or magic. Her brother, Ral, paced in slow circles around her, scraping patterns in the snow with the pointed tips of his boots, his movements growing increasingly erratic. Liam felt the group's tension pressing against his own thoughts, like the weight of deep water. He remained a few steps away, still watching the sun, the ice, and the scattered bits of failed tinder. He had found the general shape of an idea, but it was still faint, like a memory seen through fog. For now, he kept quiet, letting the others work through their frustration. Ral stopped pacing abruptly and jabbed a gloved finger toward the broken ridge. "We should look farther," he said. "There must be something we missed. Captain Arhes would not assign an impossible task." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying more fear than determination. Kor lifted his head, eyes narrowing. "We looked. All we found was frozen dust, dead moss, and useless crystal." "Then we look again," Ral insisted, though he did not move. He wrapped his arms around himself, staring at the ridge as if it had personally betrayed him. Sarah snapped her visor shut and straightened. "No, we are thinking incorrectly. This environment is designed to test adaptability, not stubbornness. If our methods fail, we must reconsider the fundamentals of combustion in this climate." Kor threw his arms out in exasperation. "We reconsidered everything already." "You reconsidered brute force," Sarah said sharply. "Not everything." Kor bristled, stepping closer, but before he could speak, Lena intervened. She rose from the stones and placed a hand on his arm. "Arguing wastes energy and time," she said softly. "We need a new plan." Liam watched the exchange carefully. He could almost feel the group fracturing into small, frustrated camps. Sarah's cold logic, Kor's fierce stubbornness, Lena's fragile calm, Ral's anxiety. The more they spoke, the more tangled the conversation became, a knot tightening instead of loosening. Sarah paced beside the fire pit, boots crunching rhythmically. "The air density is too low, and the cold drains heat faster than we can produce it. We need something that resists heat loss long enough to ignite." "We do not have fuel," Kor muttered. "Everything here is too wet or too dead." "Not wet," Sarah corrected. "Frozen." "Same thing," he growled. She shot him a glare that could have cracked stone. Liam stepped forward then, compelled by the rising frustration swirling around the group. He stopped beside Lena and knelt beside the pile of brittle fibers she and Ral had collected earlier. The pieces looked even drier now, like they were decomposing into powder just by existing in the cold. He pinched a few strands, rolling them between his fingers. They crumbled instantly, leaving a dusting of pale fragments on his gloves. "These could still work," Liam murmured. Sarah turned toward him sharply. "How? Nothing will heat them enough to catch." Liam lifted his head, meeting her gaze. "Maybe not with friction or charge, but there are other ways to concentrate heat." Kor scoffed loudly. "Unless you carry a star in your pocket, we are out of heat." Liam did not answer. He looked past Kor instead, past Sarah, past Lena, focusing again on the bright, cold sun hanging low in the sky. Its light cast long, sharp shadows, cutting across the ice in bright lines. Even Captain Arhes's silhouette looked like a slash of darkness etched into the world. Lena followed his gaze. "You think the sunlight is strong enough?" Liam nodded slowly. "It might be, if we can focus it." Sarah tapped her chin. "There is no glass here, no lenses. Even if we had a polished metal plate, the surface area would be too large to focus effectively." "We do not need glass," Liam said quietly. "Only something transparent." Sarah frowned. Ral blinked. Kor raised an eyebrow. Lena tilted her head, waiting. Liam reached down, brushed the remaining powder from his gloves, and walked toward the untouched patch of clear ice he had examined earlier. It looked like a slab of frozen glass, smoother than any natural formation had a right to be. He crouched beside it and rested a hand on its surface. Sunlight bent slightly as it passed through, shimmering within the depths of the slab. "Ice can focus light," Liam said, "if it is shaped correctly." Kor barked a laugh. Ice melts, ice shatters, ice scatters light. It is not stable enough. Liam shook his head. Clear, dense ice can work. My homeworld has regions cold enough to freeze lakes into solid plates. You can use chunks of it like crude lenses. If we can find a piece thick enough and shave it into the right shape, we can magnify the sunlight. Sarah crouched beside him, examining the ice with narrowed eyes. You are suggesting optical magnification without tools. With the tools we have, Liam corrected. Our knives, the heated edges of our suits, even our body heat. We only need one decent curve. Ral's shoulders loosened slightly. Lena's eyes lit with a soft spark of hope. Cor remained skeptical but silent. For the first time since the test began, the tension in the group shifted, not dissolving, but redirecting, like a river forced into a new channel. Sarah touched the ice surface lightly. If we damage the slab, we lose it. We need to be precise. We do not carve the slab, Liam said. We break off a piece and shape it. Cor stepped forward. I can break it. Sarah glared. Do not overdo it. Cor snorted. I can break it without destroying the entire valley. Liam pointed to a portion where the ice thinned before flowing into a thicker ridge. Break along that seam. We only need a chunk the size of your hand. Cor crouched, planted his feet, and pressed his palms into the ice. Plates along his arms glowed faintly, channeling strength into his grip. With a controlled grunt, he applied pressure. A sharp crack rippled across the seam, a spiderweb of tiny fractures spreading outward. He shifted his weight, pressed again, and the ice snapped cleanly, releasing a thick, clear shard. He lifted it with both hands, frost spraying into the air. Sarah inspected the shard immediately. This could work, she murmured. We smooth the edges until one side forms a convex curve. Ral looked uncertain. How do we smooth ice? Liam stood and reached for the shard. With patience. He placed the shard in his hands and exhaled slowly, letting his warm breath wash over the surface. Frost softened. Edges glistened. Lena stepped closer, watching intently. This is slow, she whispered. Slow is fine, Liam replied. We still have time. Sarah nodded reluctantly. Then we begin shaping. Cor glanced at the sun. And what if your lens does nothing? Liam finally looked up at him. Then we fail. But it is better than repeating methods we know cannot work. Cor did not argue this time. The cadets fell into a coordinated silence, Sarah assisting with measurements, Lena collecting more moss fragments, Ral holding tools, Cor preparing additional ice pieces if needed. Liam continued smoothing the shard, turning it carefully, watching sunlight bend inside it more and more with each pass of his breath. For the first time, the trial no longer felt like a dead end. A path had opened, still narrow, still uncertain, but real. And now every cadet leaned closer, no longer driven by desperation, but by the fragile, warming possibility that the impossible task might finally bend in their favor. Liam held the ice shard carefully as the others gathered around him, the sun glinting off its uneven edges. The piece was thick and surprisingly heavy, and although it was clearer than most natural ice, faint veins still threaded through its interior. He turned it slowly in his hands, studying how the light bent as it passed through. The fragment was far from perfect, but it was workable. The cold bit at his knuckles, yet he kept his grip steady, knowing that even a moment of carelessness could crack the shard in half. Sarah leaned in beside him, her visor displaying a grid overlay across the ice. Her eyes flicked between the shard and the data, her expression solemn but intent. She tapped her wrist slate and adjusted the grid to match the shard's current curvature. The top side is almost convex enough, she said, her tone cautious. But the lower edge needs more rounding. If the curvature is uneven, the focal point will scatter. Cor knelt on Liam's other side, his large frame blocking part of the wind. He crossed his arms and watched, though the skepticism on his face softened into something closer to reluctant curiosity. Tell me how much to break, he said, clearly eager to apply brute force again if needed. Sarah shot him a sharp look. "You will not break anything until I say so. This requires finesse." Kor grumbled under his breath, but he did not argue further. Lena approached quietly, carrying a cluster of dried moss she had found beneath another ice overhang. She held it close to her chest for protection from the wind, careful not to let any of the fragile strands crumble. Her steps were deliberate, and she stopped just within the circle of cadets. "I found this," she said softly. "It feels drier than the other pieces." Liam nodded to her. "Good. Keep it sheltered for now." Ral hovered behind Lena, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve, his breath forming rapid clouds. His nervous energy spilled into every motion, and he shifted his weight from foot to foot as he studied the ice lens in Liam's hands. "Are you sure this will work?" he asked. His voice cracked slightly, despite the attempt to hold it steady. Liam lifted the shard to eye level again. "It has to be shaped more, but the idea is sound. It only needs to focus enough sunlight to heat the moss until it smolders." Ral clasped his hands together tightly. "Smoldering is not fire." "Smoldering becomes fire," Liam replied, "if we handle it right." Captain Arhes remained at her elevated position, observing in silence. Her glowing markings shifted rhythmically, betraying nothing of her thoughts. Her lack of commentary meant only one thing. She saw no rule being broken, and so the task continued. Liam exhaled slowly onto the shard, fogging the surface. The warmth of his breath softened the outer layer just enough to change the texture. He took the edge of his glove and rubbed gently, smoothing the softened ice. It was a painstaking process, and progress came in tiny increments, but each pass rounded the surface a little more. Sarah crouched lower, recalibrating the grid overlay every few moments. "A little more on the lower arc," she instructed. "You are close." Liam nodded and repeated the process. Breath, rub, feeling the curve under his fingers. The cold made his jaw ache, but he continued. Kor shifted impatiently. "This is too slow. We are wasting time." "Speed is irrelevant if the lens does not work," Sarah snapped. "Let him continue." Liam worked without looking up. His breath rose in thin clouds, his fingers numbed. The shard slowly transformed. Lena watched intently, her posture straight despite the biting cold. She held the moss close, shielding it with both hands and her body. As she watched Liam's movements, her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if the deliberate rhythm comforted her. Ral, however, could not stay still. "What if the sun dips behind the ridge?" he asked. "We will lose our chance." His voice trembled again. Sarah did not look at him. "The sun will hold long enough. Stop pacing." Ral stopped only for a moment before resuming again, though he stepped farther from the group to avoid distracting Liam. Kor turned his head toward the sky. "The light is harsh enough to burn through anything," he muttered. "If this does not work, nothing will." Liam finished smoothing another section and held the shard out at arm's length. Sunlight passed through it and formed a faint, blurry shape on the snow. He shifted the angle, searching for the point where the light converged. The blur tightened into a brighter spot, though still too large to generate the needed heat. "Closer," he whispered. Sarah inspected the focal spot. One more refinement. Only one. Liam set to work again, breathing and rubbing, his gloves growing damp from melted frost that refroze at the seams. The shard glistened brighter now, its curvature more deliberate than natural. When he lifted it again, the light focused into a tighter, sharper point. The snow beneath the spot began to sink slightly where the heat melted it. Lena gasped softly. Ral froze mid-step. Kor's eyes widened. Sarah's visor lit with new readings. Liam felt a spark of hope flare inside his chest. He rose to his feet and nodded once. "It is ready." Lena stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she offered the dry moss. Liam accepted it, feeling the brittle texture through his gloves. He moved to the fire pit and knelt beside the stones. The depression in the ground protected the moss from the wind. Sarah positioned herself to shield the area further. Kor blocked another angle of the wind with his bulk. Lena knelt beside Liam, watching anxiously. Ral remained a step behind her, leaning forward so far he looked ready to fall into the pit. Liam laid the moss gently onto a flat stone and positioned the ice lens above it. He held it in both hands, focusing the bright point of sunlight onto the center of the moss cluster. The dry strands brightened under the touch of the light. The cadets leaned closer. The sunlight intensified, forming a small glowing circle. The moss darkened slightly. Liam narrowed his eyes, adjusting the angle by fractions. A faint wisp of steam rose. The wind shifted, but Kor braced himself and blocked it. Sarah monitored the focal point's temperature. Lena held her breath. Ral whispered a quick prayer to whatever ocean deity governed his homeworld. Liam kept the lens steady, hands barely moving. The moss twitched as the heat seeped into it. Another wisp rose, this one darker. Smoke. Liam's heart pounded, but he did not shift his focus. The moss curled inward, dry strands contracting as the heat climbed. A thin tendril of smoke lifted from the center, weaving upward before dissolving into the cold air. Lena's eyes widened. Sarah inhaled sharply. Ral gripped his gloves. Kor leaned in with renewed intensity. Liam lowered the lens a little more, concentrating the focal point until the glow brightened again. The smoke thickened, forming a steady thread. The brittle surface of the moss began to glow faintly red. Liam felt the world shrink to a single point of light, a single fragile moment. Then the moss flared. A tiny ember appeared in its heart, pulsing like a living thing. The cadets gasped as one. The ember brightened, clinging to life despite the icy air. Liam removed the lens carefully and cupped his hands around the ember, shielding it. "We need more airflow," he whispered. Sarah nodded and shifted her hands to create a channel. Lena did the same. Ral leaned closer. Kor hovered behind Liam, ready to block any stray gust. Liam blew gently. The ember glowed brighter. A small lick of flame rose. It flickered once, twice, then steadied. A fire, tiny but real, burned in the frozen valley. A warmth unlike anything the moon had known for ages radiated outward, fragile but undeniable. Lena's eyes filled with awe. Ral let out a breath he had held too long. Sarah stared as if she had just witnessed a physical impossibility. Kor grinned, his earlier doubt melting away. Liam kept the flame sheltered, feeding it slowly with additional moss and careful breaths. He felt relief settle upon him like a warm cloak. Against the harsh, frozen world around them, the impossible had become possible. And the cadets, still staring at the newborn flame, realized that they were seeing something more than just fire. They were witnessing a human trick older than many civilizations, a spark of ingenuity that defied cold, fear, and failure. The test was not over, but the path forward now glowed with a faint, rising flame. The tiny flame quivered as if it were unsure of its right to exist in the frozen valley, but Liam cupped his hands around it, guarding its fragile life. The warmth brushed his palms in soft pulses, a stark contrast to the biting cold that still ruled the air. The smoke rose in a thin ribbon, twisting before it was torn apart by the wind above the protective ring formed by the cadets. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, almost reverent. The flame's glow reflected in Lena's wide eyes and glimmered across Sarah's visor, catching on the faint ridges of her focused expression. Kor leaned close, his breath steaming with excitement and disbelief, while Ral stood frozen, caught between awe and fear that the flame might vanish if he exhaled too loudly. Liam fed another pinch of dry fibers into the ember's heart, watching them catch with a faint crackle. The flame strengthened, small but determined. "We need more material," Liam said softly. His voice broke the spell, drawing the cadets back into motion. Sarah straightened first, her voice regaining the crisp clarity that had wavered earlier. "Lena, gather more of the moss. Bring only the driest strands. Ral, Help her search. Choose what feels brittle enough to snap cleanly." Lena nodded and hurried off toward the shadowed overhang. Ral followed her, glancing back every few steps to make sure the flame was still alive. Kor rose and cracked his knuckles, eager to contribute. "I can find larger fuel," he said. "There must be denser material hidden in the cracks." "Frozen logs would not exist here," Sarah replied. "The flora is minimal, nothing substantial enough to sustain a long burn." Kor smirked. "You do not know what hides under the surface." He strode toward a jagged ridge, scanning the fissures with keen eyes. Sarah shifted her attention back to the fire pit. She knelt beside Liam and activated her visor's thermal sensor. The display lit with faint readings, and she adjusted the settings to monitor the flame's heat output. "This temperature is insufficient for the final requirement," she said. "It will not boil water yet." Liam nodded without looking away from the flame. "We need to build it slowly. The moss is too fine to burn hot for long. It is only meant to start the fire, not sustain it." Sarah observed him for a moment. "Your calm is strangely reassuring," she said. "Most would panic at this stage." Liam smiled faintly. "Where I grew up, fire was a responsibility. Panic never helped." Sarah softened at that, though only for an instant. She returned her gaze to the readings, her expression sharpening again. The flame flickered as a brief gust brushed the stone ring, but Liam's hands shielded it. When the wind passed, the flame steadied once more. The shadows around it danced gently, casting warm shapes across the cold stone like fleeting ghosts of life in a barren world. Lena and Ral returned with a larger bundle of moss than before. Lena set it down carefully, her hands trembling slightly from the cold. "This is everything we could find," she said. "There was no more dry material under the overhang." Ral crouched beside Liam and peered at the flame, his eyes shining with nervous pride. "Is this enough?" "For now," Liam said. He broke a portion from the cluster and fed it to the fire, watching it ignite with a soft hiss. "We need to add it slowly, or we will smother the flame." Lena knelt beside him, mimicking his motions as she watched him place each piece. The flame grew taller, still modest but steadier, its glow warm enough to melt the nearest bits of frost. Ral sat beside her, though he kept his hands clasped in his lap, terrified of ruining the delicate balance. Footsteps crunched over the snow. Kor returned, holding something in both hands. His expression was triumphant. "Look at this," he said. He dropped a chunk of pale, fibrous material beside the pit. It was thicker than moss, with a spongy texture and denser strands running through it. "Found it frozen into a crack," he explained. "Old plant matter, compressed, tough. It might burn longer than the moss." Sarah knelt to examine it. "It is organic," she confirmed. "Low moisture, possibly aged. It could sustain a stronger flame." Liam tore a small strip from the mass and tested it near the fire. It caught slowly, much slower than moss, but once it ignited, it produced a hotter, longer-lasting burn. "This will work," Liam said. Kor's grin widened, pride swelling in his chest. "I told you the ridge hides things." Sarah ignored his boast, but did not attempt to hide the relief that softened her posture. Liam added several thin strips of the compressed material to the fire. The flame brightened, stretching taller, crackling with new life. The warmth grew stronger, and the ice near the edge of the pit began to melt in tiny rivulets. The cadets watched the growing flame as if it were some fragile creature learning to stand. Each successful flicker, each new breath of fire, strengthened not only the flame, but their spirits as well. "We should prepare the water," Sarah said. "The final requirement cannot be ignored." Lena retrieved the metal container from her belt pouch. Her hands shook slightly as she unscrewed the cap and held it out. Liam nodded. "Place it above the fire, but not too close yet. We need to build more heat first." Kor constructed a simple stand from fragments of stone, placing them in a stable formation that hovered over the flame but did not smother it. Liam guided him with precise instructions, ensuring the structure allowed airflow beneath the pot. Lena set the container on the stand. The metal made a soft clicking sound as it settled. A faint trail of steam rose from its surface almost immediately, though the water inside was far from boiling. Ral watched with wide eyes. "Will it work?" he asked. Liam looked at the fire, the pot, then the sun slowly drifting across the horizon. "If we keep feeding the flame carefully, it will." As if summoned by his confidence, the flame surged higher when he added another piece of the dense plant matter. Its orange glow reflected off the cadets' visors and faces, chasing away the anxious tension that had clung to them since the test began. Sarah monitored the rising temperature. "It is increasing steadily," she said. "We must maintain this rate for several minutes." Kor knelt near the fuel pile, eager to assist. Lena and Ral prepared more strips of the compressed material. Liam continued adjusting the arrangement, coaxing the flame into a stronger, more stable burn. The group moved together now, not scattered, not desperate, but synchronized. Each cadet performed a task, contributing to the growing fire that symbolized their teamwork more vividly than any training exercise before. The flames licked at the bottom of the pot, sending sharp pops through the cold air. The water trembled. Small bubbles formed along the edges. "It is working," Lena whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. Ral exhaled shakily. "I did not think we would get this far." Kor folded his arms with pride. "Of course we did." Sarah did not correct him this time. She simply nodded as she watched the readings climb. Liam kept his focus on the fire, adjusting its fuel, shielding it from sudden gusts, ensuring every breath of it counted. Steam rose steadily from the pot. The bubbles grew larger, gathering at the bottom. Then one broke the surface with a soft, decisive pop. Lena gasped. Ral covered his mouth with both hands. Sarah's visor flashed with confirmation. Captain Arhes finally stepped down from her outcrop, her movements slow and deliberate. She approached the fire pit and studied the boiling water, then the flame, then the cadets, standing around it with faces brightened by firelight. Her expression was unreadable, but her glowing markings pulsed with a new rhythm. "You have achieved ignition and sustained combustion under hostile conditions," she said. "A task many cadets fail despite favorable environments." She paused, her gaze shifting to Liam. "And you did so using ingenuity uncommon among your peers." Lena straightened with pride. Ral swallowed hard, overwhelmed. Kor smirked with satisfaction. Sarah allowed herself a small nod toward Liam, acknowledging what his calm persistence had accomplished. Liam said nothing, letting the fire speak instead. The flame roared softly, steady and warm, defiant against the frozen world around it. The test was nearing its end, but something deeper had changed. The cadets had witnessed a kind of mastery none of them had expected, from a human whose quiet patience had reshaped their understanding of survival, flame, and cooperation. The fire was no longer simply a requirement. It had become proof that knowledge shared across worlds could ignite more than just a spark. It could forge connection. It could reshape belief. It could burn through fear itself. And as steam rose into the pale sky, the flame continued to grow, leaving no doubt that the final challenge was theirs to claim. By the time the water rolled in a full, eager boil, the fire had settled into a steady rhythm, a living core of orange and gold, framed by the stone ring. The heat spilled into the air in palpable waves, driving back the edge of the cold until the cadets could feel warmth seep through the layers of their uniforms. Steam surged from the pot in a white column that twisted upward before dissolving into the pale sky. Captain Arhes watched the rising steam for several heartbeats, then tapped a control on her wrist. The timer projected against her visor winked out. The soft chime that marked the end of the trial of embers sounded across the valley, clear and final. The sound broke the tension like a brittle shell. Lena let out a small, startled laugh that turned into a breathless exhale. Ral's shoulders dropped in sudden relief. his knees almost buckling as the unspent fear drained from his muscles. Kor straightened with pride, folding his arms as if trying to anchor the sense of victory inside his chest. Sarah's lips parted as she studied the data feed one last time, the numbers confirming what her eyes already saw. The task was complete, the requirements satisfied. Captain Arhes stepped closer to the fire, the glow from the flames reflecting along the luminous seams on her skin. She glanced at the water, at the pot, then at each cadet in turn. Her gaze lingered on Liam for a second longer than the others. "This exercise is concluded," she said. Her voice carried easily, amplified slightly by the implants in each cadet's ear. "You have not only fulfilled the parameters, but also demonstrated an unconventional solution in a hostile environment." Kor drew in a breath, obviously ready to speak, but Sarah's elbow nudged his side in a silent warning. Captain Arhes did not appear to notice the exchange. She shifted her attention fully to Liam. "Cadet Liam Harper," she said, "you introduced the critical method that enabled ignition. Explain your reasoning." Liam adjusted his stance, feeling the eyes of the entire group on him. The fire crackled softly at his side. He did not look at the others yet, choosing instead to focus on the instructor. "I knew we could not rely on standard academy tools," he said. "The cold drained energy too quickly, and the air did not support our usual ignition methods. But there was still sunlight everywhere, scattered across the ice. On my homeworld, clear ice can bend light. I thought that if we could shape a piece into a crude lens, we could concentrate enough heat on a small point to light the driest material we could find." Captain Arhes tilted her head slightly. "You speak as though this method is common where you come from." Liam hesitated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It is not common, but it is old. People once used glass or polished crystal to start fires. Some experimented with ice lenses in extreme cold. I remembered hearing about that when I was younger. I never thought I would need it here." Sarah stepped forward, unable to keep silent. "His approach was sound," she said. "Once he shaped the ice, the focal point reached adequate temperatures. My readings confirmed that the concentration of energy was high enough." Captain Arhes glanced at her. "You did not dispute his method?" Sarah shook her head. "No, instructor. I questioned the precision, but the concept was solid. I chose to support it." Kor cleared his throat, unwilling to remain quiet any longer. "He had the idea," Kor said, jerking his chin toward Liam. "But he needed that crystal ridge. I brought the denser fuel. Without that, the flame might have failed before the water boiled." Lena nodded quickly. "And we gathered as much moss as we could find," she added. "Liam could not have done everything alone." Ral nodded as well, though he remained quiet. Captain Arhes let the chorus of voices fade, then lifted a hand for silence. "You are correct," she said. "This was not a test of one cadet. It was a test of a unit. Individual ingenuity matters, but survival depends on cooperation." Her gaze swept across the group again, softer now. "You all contributed in different ways. Resource identification, fuel collection, shielding the flame, monitoring temperature. None of you could have passed alone." Liam felt a small knot in his chest loosen at those words. He had braced himself for resentment, for the possibility that the others would focus only on his contribution and forget their own. Instead, the instructor had named each role, placing the fire at the center of shared effort rather than solitary triumph. Captain Arhes took a step back, her boots crunching softly on the frost. "You will return to the shuttle shortly," she said. "Debrief will occur aboard the Academy station. For now, you may keep the fire until departure. Treat it as both reward and reminder." With that, she turned and walked back toward her observation point, giving them space. No one spoke for a long moment. The fire burned steadily, the pot still rattling faintly atop the stone stand as the boiling water thickened into rolling waves. Finally, Lena broke the hush. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but suffused with wonder. "We did it," Liam corrected gently. Kor snorted. "You can pretend this was not your idea," he said, "but everyone at the academy will know who taught alien cadets to light fire with ice." There was no venom in his words, only rough amusement. Ral moved closer to the flames until the heat painted his cheeks pink. "I did not understand fire before this," he admitted quietly. "On my homeworld, heat comes from vents in the ocean floor, from deep currents. It does not dance in the air like this. It does not feel alive." Liam watched the flames sway and shrink slightly as the fuel shifted. "Fire is dangerous," he said. "On my world, it destroyed forests, cities, whole regions, but it also kept us alive. It cooked food, forged metal, drove engines. It is both a tool and a threat. Respect matters more than fear." Sarah studied the flame as if it were an equation. "Our academy teaches combustion as a reaction," she said. "Fuel, oxygen, ignition. It is easy to think of it as just chemistry. But this test felt different from a simulation. The numbers did not fully capture the risk." "That is the point," Liam said. "You cannot feel danger through a screen." Kor dropped onto a stone with a heavy sigh and extended his gloved hands toward the fire. "Danger or not," he said, "I have never appreciated heat as much as I do right now." The others laughed, the sound bright in the cold air. The laughter felt different from the strained humor they had forced earlier. This time, it rang with release and genuine relief. For several minutes, the cadets simply stood or sat around the fire, letting the warmth sink into sore muscles, letting the reality of success settle into place. No one rushed to pack up equipment or recount the exact sequence of events. The experience lingered too vividly in their minds to require immediate analysis. Eventually, the distant hum of approaching engines broke the quiet. The shuttle returned, its silhouette cutting across the sky as it descended toward the valley. Snow gusted outward in a swirling halo as it touched down a short distance away. Captain Arhes signaled with a raised arm. "Time to depart," she called. "Extinguish the fire. Do not leave an active hazard." The group stood reluctantly. Lena looked at the flames with a hint of sadness. "It feels wrong to put it out," she murmured. Liam understood the sentiment. He had always found something mournful in the act of smothering a campfire, as if ending a conversation mid-sentence. But he also knew that leaving it unattended was worse. "It is part of the lesson," he said. "We started it. We are responsible for ending it safely." Sarah took the pot, now empty of useful heat, and carefully poured a controlled measure of water along the base of the flames, not enough to send ash flying, but sufficient to dampen the core. Liam used a piece of stone to spread the remaining embers, breaking up the coal bed until the glow dimmed and died. Smoke thinned to a ghostly whisper, then nothing. Soon only a darkened patch of stone and a ring of displaced rocks remained, with faint warmth trapped beneath the surface. As the last hint of orange vanished, Ral exhaled slowly. "It is almost as if it never existed," he said. Liam shook his head. "It existed," he replied. "In our scores, in what we learned, in what we remember." Kor slapped him lightly on the shoulder, almost knocking him off balance. "You are going to become a proverb, human," Kor said with a smirk. "The instructors will tell new cadets that once a human started a fire with ice, while an entire squad of advanced species failed in the usual ways." Sarah's mouth twitched. "If that helps future cadets consider environmental alternatives, I approve of the proverb," she said dryly. Lena smiled. "I hope someone draws it," she said. "I would hang that sketch above my bunk." Ral nodded in quick agreement, the image clearly amusing him. The group gathered their minimal gear and walked toward the shuttle. Liam looked back once at the empty fire pit. The valley seemed a little less hostile now, as if it had acknowledged their existence and chosen not to swallow them whole. He boarded the shuttle with the others, the ramp closing behind them with a soft hiss. Inside, the cabin flooded with comparative warmth. The uniform's thermal plates powered down gradually as the external heaters took over. The cadets dropped into their seats, exhaustion finally making itself known in heavy limbs and sluggish blinks. As the shuttle rose from the valley, the frozen moon fell away beneath them, the fire pit shrinking into a small, dark mark on the landscape before vanishing entirely from view. The hum of the engines swelled, and the window view shifted from ice cliffs to the black velvet of space, dotted with stars and the faint glow of the Academy station ahead. During the transit, Captain Arhes moved down the aisle, pausing beside each row long enough to enter evaluations on her wrist console. When she reached Liam's row, she stopped fully and looked at him without speaking for a moment. "Human ingenuity is often mentioned in strategic briefings," she said at last, "usually in abstract terms. Today, I observed it directly. You held knowledge from a world of forests and lakes and applied it on a dead, frozen moon. That is the kind of adaptation the Academy values." Liam shifted, feeling heat rise to his cheeks that had nothing to do with the shuttle's climate controls. "I just used what I knew," he said. "You used what you knew and shared it," she corrected. "You did not hoard the idea for personal credit. You invited collaboration. That distinction matters." Her gaze flicked briefly to Sarah, Kor, Lena, and Ral. "You all responded," she added. "You did not dismiss the unfamiliar. You supported it. That also matters." With that, she moved on, continuing down the aisle. Sarah glanced sidelong at Liam once the instructor moved out of earshot. "I will be recalibrating my assumptions about primitive techniques," she said. "I considered them obsolete. That was clearly an error." Liam smiled. "Where I come from, old does not always mean useless." Kor snorted. "If this is what human childhood is like," he said, "I understand why your species keeps showing up in history lectures." Lena tugged lightly at the strap across her chest. "I am glad you came to the Academy," she said quietly. "If you had not, I think we would have failed today." Ral nodded, his earlier nervousness replaced with shy gratitude. "I will not forget the sight of that ember," he added. "It will show up in my dreams for a long time." The shuttle docked with the Academy station, the gentle thud of magnetic clamps announcing their arrival. As the cadets disembarked and followed the corridor toward debrief, Liam felt an odd sense of distance wrap around the day's events, as if he had stepped from one world into another while carrying a fragile memory cupped in both hands. In the debriefing chamber, projections of the valley appeared above the central table, displaying temperature gradients, energy readings, and the timeline of the trial. Captain Arhes summarized the performance of the unit, highlighting missteps early in the exercise and the turning point when the group changed strategies. She noted the importance of considering local materials, the danger of over-reliance on standardized tools, and the strength of combining diverse knowledge across species. When she spoke of the moment the lens focused sunlight onto the moss, the projection zoomed in on the recorded image. A small, concentrated flare of brightness against the brittle fibers, a tiny herald of what would become the flame. "This trial will be added to our training archive," she concluded. "Future cadets will study it, learn from both the failures and the solution." As the projection faded, a quiet murmur passed through the room. The idea that this day would be recorded, replayed, and dissected by new cohorts sent a small ripple of pride through each of the cadets who had lived it. When the debrief ended and the cadets were dismissed, the group drifted into the corridor together. The artificial gravity felt a little strange after the uneven ground of the moon, but the familiar buzz of the station's systems seeped into the background, comforting in its constancy. Sarah walked at Liam's side. "You realize this changes how the others will see you," she said. "You are no longer just the human curiosity in our class." Liam shrugged one shoulder. "I did not come here to be a curiosity," he said. "I came here to learn." Lena caught up with them, her steps light despite the long day. "You did both," she said brightly. "You learned and you taught. That is more than most do in a midterm." Kor strode a few paces ahead but turned to walk backward, facing them with a crooked grin. "Next time we have a survival test, I am staying close to him," he announced. "If the instructors drop us into a desert made of glass, I expect him to polish the sand into lenses and cook our rations with reflected sunlight." Ral laughed, the sound clear and genuine. "I will help carry the sand," he volunteered. Liam could not stop the smile that spread across his face. The strain, the cold, the fear of failure. Those feelings had already begun to fade, leaving behind something warmer. The memory of the ember glowed inside him, not as a triumph to hoard, but as proof that the skills he had brought from home belonged in this vast, strange academy among stars. In the weeks that followed, whispers of the ice fire trial moved through the station. New cadets tilted their heads when he passed, curious about the human who had lit a flame with sunlight and frozen water. Instructors referenced the exercise in lectures, usually without naming him, but everyone in his unit knew the story from the inside. For Sarah, the trial became a reminder that equations lived best when they touched real air and real danger. For Kor, it was a tale of strength guided by patience instead of force alone. For Lena and Ral, it was the moment when the abstract idea of fire transformed into something personal, something that warmed more than just hands. For Captain Arhes, it was evidence that the Academy's mission, to bring disparate minds together and teach them to survive the unknown, still held value in a universe obsessed with advanced technology. And for Liam, it was the day he stepped out of the role of outsider and took his place as part of a unit, part of a story that belonged to more than one world. The frozen moon continued circling its distant star, ignorant of the small ring of darkened stone left behind in one of its valleys. No one returned to that fire pit during the term. No new flame rose there. But in the memory of the cadets who had stood in that cold hollow, cupping their hands around a fragile spark, the fire never fully died. It lived on in the way they approached each new challenge, in the questions they asked about the ground beneath their boots, the light above their heads, the tools in their hands. It lived in the quiet certainty that somewhere, in every impossible problem, there might be an overlooked piece of ice waiting to be shaped, a ray of light waiting to be focused, and a small, stubborn ember ready to ignite.